Welcome, everybody. This is session 3.4 on enabling conditions and drivers for energy efficiency. My name is Christine Egan, and I have the pleasure of being the CEO of an organization called CLASP, who works on the energy efficiency of appliances, lighting, and equipment around the world. We have 5 esteemed speakers today. We'll start with a broad discussion of unlocking the potential of energy efficiency in the ASEAN region. Take a bit of a spin around building energy efficiency, and then a little bit of depth in compliance for appliance energy efficiency programming. Take a country-specific tour and get some context on the situation in Cambodia. And then again, a broad discussion of the campaign mission efficiency from our last speaker. And so we'll start big, we'll drill down into some of the corners and content of this space, and then end big again, end broad again, to bring the discussion to hopefully have a great Q&A on the things that enable energy efficiency and where the barriers are and what we're doing to make sure we're delivering on the first fuel. We know that energy efficiency must come first and come often if we are to meet our climate goals and our energy security goals. And so this is an incredibly important discussion, and I'm really glad to have the esteemed guests to have this conversation today here at ASEF in Manila. Our first speaker is Rio John Peter Silatonga from the Asia Clean Energy Forum. He's a research analyst there. His work emphasizes policy studies, stakeholder engagement, and promotion of innovative business models and energy financing. He's authored numerous papers on energy efficiency, from green buildings to DSM and to standards and labeling in the ASEAN region. And with that, I will turn it over to Rio John Peter in order to make his presentation. Thanks very much.
Testing. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Christine, for the introduction. Yes, I'm Rio. I'm coming from the ASEAN Center for Energy. We are located in Jakarta, Indonesia. So today I'm really grateful. Just want to share a bit regarding our, what we have been doing to accelerate energy efficiency in the ASEAN region. So just want to frame my presentation because ASEAN actually has a lot of potential for energy efficiency. So through my presentation, I just want to share you how we are actually, doing energy efficiency promotion in order to unlock the energy efficiency potential in the region. Next one, please. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so this is kind of my outline of my presentation today. So I'll share regarding, I think more emphasize on what actually the enabling strategy that we have been doing in order to really see the impact of energy efficiency policy in the region. So just to bring to your attention that after the COP27 last year, just to give maybe a kind reminder that ASEAN actually has shown commitment to meet the some sort of global goals, especially the Paris Agreement. If you see on the slide, in 2020, for ASEAN member states, including Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand, updated again their commitment to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and COP27. And then the slide also tells us that ASEAN member states set energy efficiency to play more critical and important roles to meet the energy transitions of the 10 ASEAN member states. I think this morning we heard regarding some of study results from the ADB. Just to inform that I think the result will be will be, I think you will be seeing the same with what we have been doing on ASEAN Energy Outlook, the edition, the 7th edition. So from our study, the 7th edition of the ASEAN Energy Outlook, we found as well that transportation and industry is the highest energy consuming sectors in the region. If you see from the slide that oil remain the largest fuel used by the sectors from the study findings. And on the right slide, you can see that the type of the resources used by the sectors we, I mean, including transportation, building, and also commercial. And the numbers still daunted because it shows that all the sectors still dominated by fuel, almost 90% based on in the baseline scenario. So if you're interested to see more detail in terms of the study, I think please feel free to visit our study, our website on the 7th edition of ASEAN Energy Outlook. You can see how actually we come up with these fundings and some of the methodology that we apply in order we can come up with this figure. And this slide actually I want to show you some potential of energy emissions. As I mentioned, ASEAN set increasing rules of energy efficiency to meet the energy transition and also net zero goals by 2050. Based on our 7th edition of ASEAN Energy Outlook, we found that there is a great potential of energy efficiency to reduce emission in the region. So, consisting from various scenarios that we put in the study. Next one, please. Sorry. In terms of the energy efficiency policy and regulation ASEAN, this slide actually very briefly wants to show that ASEAN actually put already some regulations related to energy efficiency, starting from energy efficiency, energy intensity target, energy consumption target per sector, and also they are also looking at how to move towards with e-mobility, electric vehicle target as well. So this is just to show that ASEAN actually put already some sort of a regulation and policy to enforce the promotion of energy efficiency in 10 ASEAN member states. And in terms of the market potential for energy efficiency in ASEAN based on our 7 ASEAN Energy Outlook, it shows that within the baseline scenarios, ASEAN will require $10 billion investment to meet the overall power investment. And under the least cost optimization scenario, ASEAN can even reduce the total investment to up to $582 billion or decreasing 80% under the APS scenarios. So for the energy efficiency based on the assuming the energy efficiency investment increase of 1% to 4% in total energy investment, and to serve to meet the 20% of the forecasted increase of the total final energy consumption, ASEAN is required to provide $10 billion for the investment of energy efficiency. This is actually aligned with the findings of the ADB study in 2016 on energy efficiency. And on key enablers, I think this is the mainly key enablers that we have been observed and then we have been assessed in 10 ASEAN member states. Just very simple, they are just consisting 3 pillars. The one is regulations, information, and finance. So for regulation, this is very important to push and also to enforce the energy efficiency across the market. So there is a famous policy that we have been seeing in ASEAN member states, including minimum energy performance standard, building energy codes, energy management policy, and also field economic standard. And information to well inform of the consumer is also finance to make energy efficiency more attractive. This is just a case of the Thailand and Singapore, how actually most cost-effective energy efficiency policy provide impact to energy consumption reduction. In Thailand, they've seen that a building energy code can provide 1,000, almost 2,000 KTOE from the implementation and enforcement of the building energy code. And currently, there are almost 100 buildings in compliance with the building energy code. Well, Singapore, they really look into the holistic approach, combination of the incentive, regulations, and education, and especially for incentive, they are really actively doing incentivizing of the energy efficiency in order to encourage the market, not just to meet the minimum energy performance, the minimum standard, but they won't go beyond the standard by providing incentive. And this is a challenge, like awareness. Yeah, this is something that we need to further, address. And insufficient financing. I think we have been heard from this morning's speaker also in terms of the financing. This is something that ASEAN is struggling for, and also need improvement on regulatory frameworks. And also in terms of complexity of government procedures, this is something that has been in the ground, and also technical challenges, incentive needs, and also innovative business model, including more capacity building and trainings. And this is kind of a venue of collaboration with ASEAN Center for Energy that we can work with, especially in terms of database. We actually has been building ASEAN Energy database to provide more energy efficiency database to policymakers of ASEAN. Also, we are setting long-term target under the APEC, but we need to really set the target in order to align with the international target and timelines. And capacity building training, energy efficiency technology transfer, and also we doing energy efficiency ASEAN Energy Awards to engage more private sectors and also market players for energy efficiency, and also monitoring and verification frameworks. And this is where ASEAN now in terms of energy efficiency. Based on our ASEAN Energy Outlook data, we are now achieving 24.5% energy intensity reduction in 2021 based on 2005 years levels. So there is a lot of things you need to do. So I encourage everyone to work together with us. ASEAN has a great potential to unlock energy efficiency, and let us work together to promote energy efficiency and reduce environmental impact for fossil fuel consumption in the ASEAN region. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Rio John Peter. That was an impressive speed with which you got through those slides. You stuck to the 10 minutes. I'm very impressed. So thank you for that. And we will now go to Wei Zhao, our next presenter from the University of Cambridge and a longtime consultant to ADB with 19 years of experience in consulting and research on clean energy, climate finance, sustainable infrastructure, building science, and technology. He has a PhD and a master's from the University of Cambridge, and he'll present to us today on accelerating the net zero transition of building construction in Asia and the Pacific. And with that, I'll turn it to you.
Oh, it comes. Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Christine, for your very kind introduction. Morning, everybody. Today, I'll be very briefly talking about decarbonization of buildings and the construction sector in Asia and the Pacific. What's the relevance of this particular sector to ADB's policies and strategies, and how ADB operations can help DMC achieve good progress in this very important area, where the very large potential of emission reduction remains to be tapped. Well, buildings are one of the major contributors to energy use and carbon emissions in cities. Globally, from 2010 to 2019, the building energy intensity from 2010 to 2019, building energy intensity decreased by about 10% due to continued efficiency improvement of building envelope, building system, and equipment. However, this progress was not enough to offset the impact of rapid growth of the building stock, the total building floor area. According to a projection by the IEA, from 2020 to 2050, the global building sector, the building stock size will increase by at least 75%. So 80% of this growth will come from the emerging and developing economies. No doubt Asia is one of the key drivers of this alarming growth, right? From now to 2050, about 2/3 of new buildings to be constructed will be located in ASEAN, China, and India. So here we are talking about 70 billion square meter, huge number. So there's a very high risk of locking in a very large number of inefficient and carbon intensive buildings, new buildings and existing buildings, which will remain there for the next few decades at least. So the large building stock size means high energy consumption and carbon emissions. So in 2018, buildings in ASEAN, the PRC, India, collectively contributed 27% and 32% to the total final energy use and the CO2 emission of the global building sector. Of course, these numbers would have been higher if all the ADB DMCs were included in the calculation, right? So over the past few years, there has been very encouraging progress in this region in terms of developing the policy landscape for building energy efficiency. This is for the whole region as a whole. So it's very important to keep in mind that there remain large variations across these DMCs in terms of the level of ambition of their sectoral targets, the scope and depth of their actions, their institutional and operational capacity, access to finance, access to affordable technologies, and so on and so forth. So in this context, Building Energy Code is actually a fundamental policy instrument to drive energy efficiency improvements in buildings. According to a survey by IEA in the end of 2021, out of the 46 Asian countries tracked by this survey, only less than 50% of the countries had mandatory building energy codes. The remaining 50%, for those countries, they either had only voluntary codes, or they were in the process of developing the codes, or they simply didn't have any known codes. So if this situation continues, about 70% of the countries, 70% of the population to be added in this region from now to 2050 will live without any building energy codes or only voluntary codes, which, as we know, are subject to high uncertainty in terms of implementation impact, right? So clearly, there's a very urgent need for greater coverage, adoption, and strength of building energy codes. At the same time, to ensure compliance of the codes, it's important to make sure that a strong system of enforcement is put in place and well operating. As a major complement to building energy codes, green building certification, or the certification for building energy efficiency, has been proven to be a quite effective instrument to demonstrate and promote good practices in terms of building design, construction, and building operation. Over the past 15 years in this region, there has been a surge of building certification schemes. This can be attributed to the very successful implementation and demonstration impact of some of the world's leading certification schemes, such as the BREEAM from the UK and the LEED from the US. So as of 2018, about half of the countries in this region already adopted building energy performance certification programs. In some countries where there is no building code, or their existing codes are too old to be applicable, to be relevant, the building certification schemes have actually been used as a sort of proxy of building code in practice. However, compared to the EU, there's still a lack of large-scale adoption of full mandatory certification scheme in this region. Next, please. Thank you. Nationally determined contributions, NDCs, are a major component of the building energy policy landscape. By 2019, 72% of Asian countries mentioned buildings in their NDCs. However, many of them still did not include specific actions to address building energy and emissions. But the positive sign is that in the updated NDCs of some of these countries, there's an increasing mention of very specific policy action on building energy performance and climate resilience. However, this progress is not enough because the breadth and depth of mitigation as well as adaptation measures for buildings, as mentioned in these updated NDCs, are still not adequate to put these countries on track with the net zero emission scenario by 2050. So what's required to achieve decarbonization of buildings? According to the IEA, globally, the building energy intensity needs to drop by at least 2.5% per year to get on track with sustainable development scenario of IEA. In this region, more progress needs to be achieved. The region average building energy intensity, not including the PRC, will need to reduce by 45% by 2030 as compared to 2019 level. So this is a level quite higher than the required level for the other part of the world. For example, 23% is required for Europe, 22% required for the North America. In the more recent IEA's net zero emission scenario, 2050, by 2030, all the buildings should be zero carbon ready. By 2050, more than 85% of the buildings should be zero carbon ready. And this includes a large number of existing buildings for which very extensive energy retrofits must be carried out to ensure that existing buildings will have the level of readiness similar to new buildings. So obviously, the large stock size of the buildings in this region will have a fundamental impact on whether these milestones will be achieved on time. So decarbonizing buildings requires very clear and ambitious policy signals to drive a number of actions and measures across new buildings, existing buildings, system appliances, equipment, building operations, building materials, and so on. Because of time constraint, I'm not going to go through all the details, just want to emphasize the last one, the building materials. The actions and measures in this category actually relate to the so-called embodied energy, embodied carbon, from building material production, the transportation of the material to the site, and on-site construction activities. So this is highly relevant, important to many DMCs because of their very strong demand for new buildings, for housing, for commercial buildings, and so on. So for ADB, supporting DMCs to decarbonize their buildings is highly relevant, as ADB aims to become this region's climate bank. Traditionally, energy efficiency in building was not a priority in ADB's operation. So we have seen very limited building-focused project in previous portfolio. But good news is that over the past 5 years, there has been increasing recognition of the importance of building energy efficiency in low-carbon buildings in some of ADB's high-level institutional documents. And these include Strategy 2030, the operational priority number 3 on climate change, number 4 on livable cities, Energy Policy 2021, which replaced the old Energy Policy 2009, and more recent Urban Sector Directional Guide 2022. And now the ongoing preparation of the bank-wide climate change action plan has already identified building decarbonization as one of the key mitigation options for enhanced action. I'm reaching my time limits. This is the last page. Yeah. So to support DMCs, to kind of translate the high-level strategies to concrete interventions supporting DMCs, it's very important for ADB to strengthen the upstream engagement with DMC governments to integrate opportunities of building and the construction sector as a priority area in the country programming process, such as the formulation of country partner strategy, strategy, identification of investment programs and projects, as well as the conceptualization of technical assistance. So in this process, it's very crucial to recognize and take into consideration the large substantial variety and the variation across DMCs in terms of several key aspects: building stock characteristics, climate conditions, economic social development, level of urbanization, the size of the population, market maturity for building energy efficiency activities, the local availability of renewable energy, access to finance, access to affordable technologies. What about their institutional, operational, and financial capacity, policy, and regulatory framework, and so on and so forth? So it's necessary to take differentiated approach to design targeted intervention to better support our DMCs. So in this context, ADB may explore grouping some of the countries in the same climate zone and facing similar, highly similar issues and opportunities for their sector, building sector, to deliver result as a scale with high implementation effectiveness, investment efficiency, and potentially lower transaction costs. So in summary, with strengthened upstream engagement and in-depth sectoral analysis, ADB and the DMC can work together to develop a strong pipeline of sizable programs and projects that can really make a difference in terms of generating transformative impact on the sectoral decarbonization. So in doing so, this will not only help DMCs achieve their NDC target, but also facilitate realization of ADB's own target of providing $100 billion climate finance to the DMCs by 2030. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Wei Zhao, for that incredibly thoughtful presentation of where we are in the region in the building sector, where we need to go, the goals and the challenges before us, and specifically some guidance and some thoughts for ADB on how they can next step. Our next speaker is Neha Dhingra. Neha, I can say, is for sure, is a leading member of CLASP's India team. She's a senior manager at CLASP, where she provides overall management of the development and execution of CLASP's India programs. She has over 10 years of experience, and her work includes program design, project management, policy, and regulatory analysis, not only in India, but in Southeast Asia and West Africa more broadly. She has a master's degree from the Terry School of Advanced Studies and a bachelor's from University of Delhi. And with that, I will turn it over to Neha to make her presentation.
Thanks, Christine. And I want to thank my previous speakers for kind of setting the stage for the regional work, as well as the role that that overall energy efficiency can play in mitigating growing energy demand. It just kind of made my job a little bit easy so that I don't have to kind of set the context around around overall energy efficiency. So today I will be talking about establishing regional compliance of labeling program, and I'll kind of share some of the best practices that exist in Asia. So Asia, 21st century is truly the Asian century, because Asia is the powerhouse, and it's the continent which is driving the global economic growth. It is the continent which is going to add a lot of electricity consumption, a lot of electricity demand. If you look at some of the numbers, then about 50% of world's electricity consumption is expected to come from Asia by 2025. It is a region which is expected to contribute about 70% growth in the global electricity demand. Now, there's a flip side to this growth, which is the GHG emissions. So if you look at the emission numbers, then about 3/4 of overall global CO2 emissions is also expected to come from Asia. And 8 out of top 20 highest emitting countries in the appliance sector are in Asia. So how do we manage this growing demand in a sustainable manner? Several studies have indicated that appliance energy efficiency is one of the most cost-effective ways to manage this growing demand. And at CLASP, we work across the world with the governments to accelerate appliance energy efficiency. And compliance is a fundamental piece to the success of appliance energy efficiency program, which it is for any efficiency program as it is, because it helps safeguard climate as well as cost savings from energy efficiency policies. There are several studies which have been conducted by UK and Australia, which have estimated that about 25% of savings from policy opportunities will be unrealized if there's not a robust compliance program. So this is the power of compliance, and this is what I'll delve deeper into. Uh, why do we need a regional compliance if countries have their own compliance program? Because appliance energy efficiency programs in the region in Asia are in various stages. Some countries are more advanced, some are in the nascent stages, which are like developing the labeling program. So if, and there are a lot of products which get traded across different countries. So if there's a regional program, or if there are countries collaborating with each other in sharing compliance related information, it not only helps in sharing information, not only helps in improving compliance, but it also helps reduce national investment. Every country does not need to invest in the testing laboratory. Every country does not need to invest in making their own product registration system. If that information is shared, then we all kind of work towards a common goal. And overall, it also leads to reduced cost. It avoids duplicate testing because manufacturers do not have to kind of test the same product. And the entry conditions are also a little bit easier. Not to say that it makes it any simpler and the compliance is at stake, but they are simpler in a manner that that it facilitates trade. It reduces the barriers, and it also helps maximize the impact from energy efficiency that we are all trying to achieve. Yeah. So these are some of the examples across the world on global regional compliance programs. In Asia, we have EPIC MVNE network, ASEAN. In Africa, we have ECOWAS, South and East Africa. Australia and New Zealand is probably one of the most successful programs. And then there's EcoPlant, which is in Europe, which is also another successful regional program. So so what are some of the potential approaches that we could adopt for harmonization? So we could adopt, there could be a bilateral agreement, which is an agreement between the two countries where they say that they would recognize each other's compliance program, they would recognize each other's product registration system, which is a successful example that has been adopted by Australia and New Zealand, as I just said. They share the cost and they have a common product registry, they have a common testing platform, and the manufacturers basically do not have to test product twice before selling into those countries. Then another approach could be multilateral, and the third approach is regional, wherein we have the speaker before me shared about ASEAN, and then there's SAARC. So there are institutional mechanisms in place which, if implemented, can help with acceleration of regional work. So what are there are some of the key steps which need to be adopted for ensuring compliance is adopted at the regional level. The first step is to establish economies' willingness to participate. The countries have to kind of agree that they want to adopt a regional system. The second step is to establish regular compliance information exchange and identification of best practices. Third step is establishing bilateral or multilateral MOUs, which kind of act as a governing framework through mutual recognition agreements, which lays out the steps as well as the governing framework for the compliance exchange. And the fourth is formal regional coordination of market surveillance activities, where the countries have agreed for a joint testing program or for sharing information on a formal basis or for having like a common product registration system. And it all leads to development of strengthened regional product registration system, testing framework, as well as national programs. So I'll spend I'll spend some time on some of the best practices that are there in Asia on compliance. So I'll talk about 3 countries here. There are more, but I've chosen these 3 countries because one is China, and China has one of the most successful programs in the region. They have about 66 products which are under MEPS. Then there's India, which is a mature program. It has 34 products which come under MEPS. And then there's Indonesia, which has recently started labeling program, and they are doing some great work on compliance. So the idea is to kind of walk us through some of the countries' programs which are in different stages so that we get a sense and countries can kind of pick and choose like where they are most suited to adopt from. So I'll not go deeper into every aspect of China's program, but I'll say I'll kind of highlight some of the key things that are out there. So first is the QR code. So China's label is equipped with a QR code. What it does is it allows consumers as well as market surveillance authorities to scan the code and compare the actual information that is on the product with the information that is in the product registration system. So if there's a non-compliance, the authorities can report it right away. Another interesting thing that China's program has is, which is very few countries in the world have done this, which is that they assessed the compliance of the products which are sold online, so on the e-commerce platforms. And they developed a tool. After realizing that the compliance was not great for the products which were sold online, they developed a tool for e-commerce platforms, which is connected with the product registration system that China has. It allows for automatic checks to ensure that the compliance is met. So this is very unique, and both Indonesia and India are on track to kind of assess the online compliance and take that path as well. Um in Indonesia, there are two interesting things that I would want to highlight. Indonesia is working towards digitization of compliance. So they have developed a digital market inspection form and a compliance database, which allows market surveillance authorities to go into the market and check the compliance of the products in a digitalized manner. And that information then gets into a tool which Indonesia has piloted for identifying high-risk products. So they do not need to check and assess every product, but it has a target. It is a targeted tool. As we know, compliance is a resource-intensive activity, and we cannot test every product. So it has to be like more targeted. Moving on to India. So there are three things that I want to highlight for India. So India conducted market surveillance of products sold in store in 5 states. And based on that, we developed like a market surveillance framework, which is now adopted by the government, and it requires all the states to conduct market surveillance on a regular basis and report back to the government. So that's one. Second is India has a unique feature that whichever products are check tested, the information is put out in public domain. And when I say public domain, it is put out in the newspapers. So, which is a unique mechanism that India has. So it has a naming and shaming. It's kind of a naming and shaming tool, which is a deterrent for manufacturers to kind of non-comply. And the third thing is that India is also learning from the experience from China as well as Europe. India is also assessing the online compliance framework, like what's the existing practices for the products which are sold online. So what I'm trying to say from all of these examples is that uh, that different countries are at different stages, and depending on the region and the kind of trade that happens and the kind of exchange that happens, countries can look at various stages and they can adopt different compliance networks and they can harmonize with different countries. To summarize, regional compliance framework is a key to facilitate regionally harmonized efficiency policy implementation. It helps protect markets and reduces resources which are needed for policy enforcement and compliance. And there are regional tools and intelligence sharing that happens, which helps increase compliance at the global level. And then countries can develop and implement processes for policy compliance, or they can strengthen the existing one. There is a lot of benefit in harmonizing them to the extent possible and participate in the regional compliance programs, as we have seen in some of the examples that I shared before. So thank you.
Thank you, Neha, for that presentation. I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Michael Renfrew has a PhD in macroeconomics from the University of Glasgow with a focus on trade and FDI in the ASEAN. He's been working in Cambodia since 2016 on topics ranging from health and education and economic development, and he is presently with Energy Lab Cambodia's he is presently Energy Lab Cambodia's program lead, overseeing the kingdom's energy ecosystem development. And Michael's going to talk to us a little bit about the situation on the ground in Cambodia for energy efficiency.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Hopefully that's all set in. Perfect. Yeah, so today it's lovely to have everyone here. I'm here to talk to you about multi-stakeholder partnerships towards energy efficiency. So sort of reiterating on Neha's point on regional opportunities, the avoidance of duplication towards changes at scale, so we can maximize national development trajectories and avoid overspending money again and again on the same thing we're all working on. Already been well introduced, so I'll skip that. So Energy Lab's mission is to accelerate clean markets in Cambodia. Specifically, we do this through clean energy sectoral support, policy advice, and strategic analysis. The idea here is really bridging the stakeholder pipeline, making sure that people aren't operating in silos and understanding the development trajectory of Cambodia's clean energy transition. We have multiple programs on this front, and several policy areas covering areas like rooftop solar, electric mobility, grid modernization, and national energy efficiency policy, which is good for today. Cambodia, in terms of its clean energy transition, could be considered at the beginning, noting though that we do have quite a high level of renewable energy, but I'd like to differentiate here between clean and renewable in the sense that clean energy avoids the sort of human and ecological impacts that some renewable energies create. Looking at 2022, in terms of generation, 54% of Cambodia's electricity was generated through hydroelectric, 7% was solar, and 39% was coal and oil. So we are at the beginning of this. We're starting to move effectively. We have a new power development plan that runs to 2040. The thing to note here and why I say we're at the beginning, we have been estimated at 45 gigawatts of high potential solar resource. By the end of 2040, we're going to use 3 of them. So we're sort of 6% of the available resource and ramping up use of imports of coal and gas and cross-border shares from Laos and Thailand. So really the purpose today is to see how we can move away from that, discussing energy efficiency where we are, partnerships in action, and how to move from advocacy to policy in a sort of civil society stakeholder bridging sense. So yeah, energy efficiency and CSOs. Cambodia has recently adopted the National Energy Efficiency Policy, or the NEEP for short, love of acronyms. Primary focus areas at the beginning are going to be building, transport, industry, and cooling. Really, we're looking to set these energy codes as noted by Professor Zhao. We have some of these available regionally in global examples, but we're right at the start of this. So we have actions, we have targets, but we need to work with the private sector to work out how these are actually going to work in application. But the initial focus will be on setting standards and labeling, minimum energy performance standards, and industry-specific targets. Interestingly enough, related to the Power Development Plan, energy efficiency savings are inputted as a production generation component of power requirement by 2040. So energy efficiency targets are set at 2.2 gigawatts of saving. So there's quite a high reliance on these energy efficiency targets coming into play. Therefore, it's incredibly important to bridge the gap between policymakers, private sector actors that will implement these policies, and communities. And I'll come on to this a bit later, specifically behavioral change. And when I refer to communities, I mean day-to-day citizens in Cambodia relative to things like your AC, what you set it at, what your fridge is doing, how you're cooking. The role of civil society here, sort of 3 broad points. One, the stakeholder mix in Cambodia contains, probably similar to other partners in the region, ministries, development partners, private sector, and civil society. In the Cambodian context, development partners play a crucial role in bridging that gap, helping develop private sector opportunities. We're increasingly moving towards blended finance to support that in a financial sense. They help give a voice to civil society, and they help government develop technical capacity towards change at scale. In terms of barriers to participation, what I'm talking about here is specifically civil society, and its advocacy and communications would be the 2 takeaways in the Cambodian context. the need to have what I would call constructive advocacy, bringing not just the identification of issues, but solutions and discussions forward. Thank you. And the ability to communicate this. We have a lot of fantastic work. We're not always the best at communication strategies, and we need to enhance that. And then opportunities for engagement. Just two of note here. The Just Energy Transition has started this discussion in terms of how to ensure as we move, there is an equitable transition away. Although as many of you may already know, when we refer to JET, JET could refer to the financing mechanism, or it could refer to civil society awareness of ensuring communities aren't left behind. So there's opportunities for engagement here, and this segues nicely into energy efficiency. In theory, there we go. Partnerships in action. So the whole point of this section is how do we take from, oh, my apologies, I'm one slide ahead of myself. Yes, so partnerships here, I'm referring to collaboration between stakeholders to promote progress. The Energy Innovation Network here is an example. It's important for me at this time to recognize the support of USAID's Regional Development Mission in being critical in supporting our partners at WWF for this initiative. Largely, the Innovation Network is a coalition of GMS CSOs. The purpose is to advocate for better renewable energy plans and achieved through knowledge sharing. But moving towards best practice exchange, technical capacity, we're still in the early stage of developing how this will work efficiently. But what's important here, and of relevance to, noting the time, energy efficiency, is the ability in the Cambodian context. Energy Lab represents the national partner of the Energy Innovation Network. We also represent a partner in the Cambodian Energy Efficiency Competition, which is the crux of this discussion to some extent. So the Cambodian Energy Efficiency Competition is focused on supporting commercial partners to adopt energy efficiency practice using cost-effective measures and promoting behavior change. You might be wondering why this is relevant, why I'm going to talk about this. Well, firstly, it's in terms of outcome. Behavior change starts, in this case, at the office, getting people to consider how they use the energy systems based on business as usual scenario projections. Last year's competition, you can see 9.2% annual savings. There's cost savings, there's CO2 savings. Where this bridges the gap in terms of partnership is private sector actors. This competition is supported by private sector consulting firms and the European Chamber of Commerce. In a CSO sense, Energy Lab and this year the WWF are critical in working with community partners to understand energy efficiency needs that can translate up for our partners in the Chamber and at CBIA in order to have practical implementation of energy efficiency policies for private sector partners and government partners crucially. Ministry of Mines and Energy and, thank you very much, Ministry of Environment are critical in this discussion. They've signed off this year an MOU supporting it. So we have an ecosystem that enables our discussions to take place at local community level, all the way up to policy and governance, where the lessons learned from this policy can be adopted back into the national energy efficiency policy. So that's the full wraparound of the beginning here. What I'd like to do, noting I've only got 2 minutes left, is talk a little bit about how we take advocacy in the sense of identifying issues in the energy transition space and turning that into policy. So how do we have practical implementation for solutions? So 3 key points to take away here, keeping me to time. I'd like to reframe this a little bit as building towards multi-stakeholder policy, because it's not enough to just go civil society to government. We have to work through the full system of change actors, especially with something as existential as the just energy transition and its cross-cutting nature to climate change, energy security, economic development, and a number of other features. So first is, as an actor, ecosystem knowledge. You need to know who is involved and what is happening beyond your own small silo, and you need to be critical in your review against your own missions and objectives. Understand why this cause is your cause, and understand it with sort of critical knowledge and review. Secondly, you need to take strategic reflection on this, particularly required in the civil society space. Why does this matter? You know how it relates to your overall objective, but what is the wider system change here? And how are you going to achieve this? Here it is crucial to involve data and discourse. NREL is a major partner in ASEF, is someone I would like to reiterate as doing some really fantastic work in this space, taking data on the ground, knowing our knowledge points. It's not enough to have a personal argument. I've got one more, thank you. It's enough to have the data points that are needed to know that we have a framework to discuss practically where we're coming from. And my final point on here is clear communication. Where are we going to communicate this and when is suitable in the civil society context? And I think in all development contexts, it's important to remember two things. We need to bring solutions. Not all of our ministry and regulatory counterparts are trying to make our lives hard. And we need to accept that time is going to move slightly slower than we would like it to. I'm happy to discuss further out of this, and thank you very much for your time and listening.
Thank you, Michael, for that interesting perspective on sort of where Cambodia is beginning the process of engaging stakeholders in dialogue as you move forward towards policy outcomes and thinking about the just energy transition along the way. I'm next going to introduce Alex Ablaza to make his presentation. Alex has spent more than 20 years of his nearly 40-year career focused on energy efficiency and clean energy, particularly in Asian markets. Across Asia and the Middle East, his focus is on scaling up energy efficiency expertise and capital flows, innovative finance mechanisms and investment structures, as well as policy reform. Presently, he heads Climergy. Did I say it right? Yes. I did, okay. A pioneer private super ESCO. He's not going to talk to us about that today, but you can get him out on the coffee break to talk a little bit about that. Today, he's going to talk to us about mission efficiency. And so with that, Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christine. You know, in the last couple of decades working across 14 energy efficiency markets, I've come to realize that the one big factor of transforming markets very quickly is to get people together. You know, it's a lot of effort building capacities, identifying, building stock, pushing technologies, access to finance. But there's not much effort in getting players together, working together, building collaborative partnerships. And let's go beyond partnerships. I'd like to use the word ecosystem. We pushed for an energy efficiency law, breaking a 29-year drought in the Philippines because we got players together, government, public, private, development, civil society, all working together. So what if we translate this idea now to causing larger change across the globe by building an ecosystem to drive progress for energy efficiency? And this is what mission efficiency is all about. It is a global collective of actions, of movers, of policymakers, of funders, of project developers, in creating a platform where people talk, people connect, people relate, people can build projects and flow capital just by connecting. So it's really about connecting money with energy efficiency project opportunities. In their three basic and fundamental strategies, first is to elevate. How do we raise the profile of energy efficiency? In many energy efficiency fora, and my dear longtime colleague Tom Dreesen sitting in the back of the room, we will always say, how can we compete against renewable energy when it's the less sexy clean energy measure, right? So how do we compete? There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of investor focus right now. There's a lot of sexiness around the renewables, especially rooftop solar nowadays. But how do we get energy efficiency, the underdog, to compete with that same policy, market, investment, and technology sexiness of other clean energy forms? Next is to support. There are a lot of gaps in energy efficiency markets, a lot of capacity gaps, financing gaps, technology gaps. So how do we bridge those gaps and create a platform that would flow and identify the gaps and who could possibly bridge those gaps? And the next is really to flow the money. how do we invest in the projects to transform the different energy efficiency markets, especially in this part of the world, Asia. It has a 10-year history, and I won't go through this busy slide, but it goes through, there's a lot of development players coming in the first few batches, and we even created a 3% club, but today it's now called and rebranded as Mission Efficiency. And it's all about getting countries and getting local governments, cities, municipalities, energy efficiency market players, funders, investors, even financial institutions to come together and create and participate in either the elevate, support, or invest pillars of mission efficiency. And by coming together and getting through this chain, we create the impacts. And to do this, we are working initially through 4 task forces. And let me breeze through the first 3. The first is the Energy Efficiency Narrative Task Force. A colleague working very heavily in the Narrative Task Force is Ben Hartley. He's at the back of the room, Sustainable Energy for All, and he will be leading a Cooling Pledge deep dive workshop at 2 p.m. today. So it's really about changing that narrative, and you see a growing number of players, including not only Sustainable Energy for All, UNEP, and the rest, but you see private sector players also are coming in. It's all about flipping the narrative to influence on the emotional response that would cause action. We maybe, just maybe, the lack of sexiness is because we lack the emotion. Maybe to make it sexier, we just have to change the way we sell energy efficiency to funders and investors. So that's what the Narrative Task Force is all about. And I'd like to quickly mention that the Narrative Task Force has had 2 charrettes, interdisciplinary workshops, one in New Delhi last month and one in Paris last week. Next is the Widening the Net Task Force. It's just casting the net, capturing more of the energy efficiency market players, catalysts, funders, developers, private sector, ESCO chains, for example, and getting them into the pool, getting them to speak up and identify their gaps or their roles or their opportunities and make that connection. Another task force is looking at a technology selector tool. So it's building up a tool, and this tool will also aid in connecting people, connecting players, whether public sector, private sector, development, or funders. The last task force, which I will spend a little bit time on, is the Marketplace Task Force. And I was asked to co-chair this task force and also bring Asia into this task force. It's all about identifying, developing, and bringing projects to funders. So it's really about creating this marketplace that would catalyze the flow of capital, whether debt or equity or even guarantees and other financial products and services, to energy efficiency projects, and working with them so that at the end they become bankable and investment grade. So it's really about bringing multilateral development banks, bringing international players, bringing project developers, bringing super ESCOs, bringing consulting firms who are working in this space, both in the sovereign or public side, or even in the private sector side, to identify projects, nurse them to investment readiness, and de-risk them. I think there's when we had the charrette in Copenhagen in June last year, I said that a lot of these resources, a lot of the brain power will have to be focused or directed towards de-risking energy efficiency investments by removing real and perceived risk, by putting more, let's say, energy savings insurance products in the market, and through other risk mitigation financial structures. So my closing slide is everyone. I'm really singing or preaching to the choir here. Be a part of the ecosystem. Sign up. It's very easy to find, missionefficiency.org. I could have placed the QR code there. Um, Sign up. There are no financial obligations. Uh, Volunteer yourself to one of the 4 task forces, whether the narrative, the selector tool, the widening the net, or even the marketplace, and then be part of the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex, for that pitch and description and invitation for engagement around mission efficiency. Also for ending a minute early, very, very impressive. So we've done a good job, I think, of having a broad conversation about the challenge of enabling energy efficiency, the criticality of enabling energy efficiency. I'm struck from listening to the speakers as we speak. We have commitments, we have goals, we have those at the country level, we have them at the regional level, we have them at the bank level. We know the tools. We're in varying degrees of implementation in different places in the region, in different sectors. China is in a different place than Cambodia. The challenges of building codes are different than the challenges of appliance energy efficiency. But broadly speaking, we know what we need to do. We seem to be aligned around the challenge where we're even mobilizing on the problem of energy efficiency's apparent absence of sex appeal. And so we're motivated around messages, around stakeholder engagement. And so as we step back, I'd like to throw a question out to each of the speakers to reflect on what are the barriers that you think we're addressing well, and what are the barriers that you think we're under addressing, the things that maybe as you kind of step back with the broadest perspective on enabling energy efficiency, we need to drill down on a little bit more. And I'll just ask if each of the speakers can maybe get your answer in your head and take maybe no more than 2 minutes each to give me your thoughts, and just move down the line in order of presentation.
Thank you, Christine. I think as I presented, the development of energy efficiency among 10 ASEAN member states in a diverse city. As I highlighted, for example, building code in Thailand is viewed as cost effective in terms of impact that they achieve, in terms of the engagement of the market players, on compliance to the building energy code. And if you see some sort of sample from Singapore, how actually incentive is the cost-effective policy in order to address the challenge of the motivation, and also the how to engage with the market players in order not just only to meet the minimum standard that set up by the government, but how incentive also able to move the market players go beyond the standard. So this is something that we found from our current observation, and also some qualitative study that policymakers that have been doing in order to address the challenge in the market in each ASEAN member state. In terms of the some challenge that I identified in my presentations, there is still a multi-dimension of the challenges. Ranging from the capacity, ranging from the policy, and also financial mechanism for energy efficiency. We found from our collective, current engagement with the 10 ASEAN member states, stakeholders, in terms of the financing, this is something that ASEAN policymakers that is struggling for, especially the complexity of the energy efficiency project and also the capacity of the policymakers. Also, when we talking about the financial language, we found from our interview with 10 ASEAN member state policymakers, some of the policymakers are still not really incapable when we're talking about energy efficiency financing mechanism. So this is something that we're going to continue in order we can address the challenge in the part of the policymakers by keep going on the capacity building program to that we can really address the challenge of the capacity building. And also from the financial side that we are been looking mainly, they are still looking at the risk of the energy efficiency project. That is the risk that is something that financial institution that need policymakers to address. So I think this is probably the brief. The policy that is effective and also something to address on energy efficiency.
So in terms of really addressing the capacity and the capability of the policymakers, kind of particularly around the financial side of the energy efficiency investment. Moving on.
I think one of the challenges that we need to consider is the need to contextualize the technical solutions, because there are a wide range of available technologies, practices. But the problem is that technologies that work well in one country, in country A, may not necessarily work well in country B, because of the accessibility of that technology, because of the affordability, replicability, scalability, and all of this, they need to be taken into consideration when formulating workable technical solutions in different developing member countries of ADB. I think in this regard, what is important is to facilitate knowledge sharing and technology transfer among different DMCs. For example, from the PRC to Pacific Island countries, or similar ways. I think ADB has been doing a great job in terms of promoting or facilitating technology transfer and knowledge sharing. For example, the Energy Sector Group of ADB has been developing a series of handbook or guidelines, such as handbook for building energy efficiency, handbook for mini-grid, waste to energy, hydrogen, and so on and so forth. So all of these knowledge products has been playing a very important role to kind of disseminate the much needed knowledge to DMC, to the government agencies, to practitioners, to the market players. So I think this is one of the things that we need to keep in mind and do more work. Thank you.
Thanks. Again, emphasizing the importance of the capacity building and knowledge sharing to ensure that the technical solutions and the programs and policies that we need to achieve the goals are available and understandable and deployable by those who are charged with doing so. Neha?
So I believe that almost all the countries have the policy and regulatory framework. It's at different stages, like some have more advanced and others have less advanced, but it kind of exists. So in addition to the barriers that have been stated by my fellow speakers, I would like to say that the capacity building of small and medium enterprises, that I think is a major barrier, particularly in smaller countries, as well as countries like India, where a lot of manufacturing happens in the unorganized sector. And those people, those industries need to be brought into the fold of the policy making. They need to have the capacity to produce efficient products to participate in the policy making. The second aspect, I believe, is a little bit underrepresented and is a key barrier, is the participation of low income and marginalized communities in the policy making process, because access to energy services is very different for different people. And if we talk about major savings coming from the cooling segment. Those are the communities, and with the heat waves and with the temperature rise, those are the communities which need to be kind of thought about while making while making a policy around buildings, or whether it's about appliances. And then last is having a strong civil society network, like we see in the West. I mean, that plays a big role in kind of developing a strong policy, which I don't think is not as strong in the countries here. So that also is another thing which is a barrier, because that kind of acts as a force to drive policy making.
Thanks, Neha, for those comments on, and particularly noting the role of SMEs. There are so many countries where we work where we find that this is one of the challenges, and how to integrate that segment in the policymaking process and bring those folks along is often a major challenge and stumbling block in policy. Michael?
Yeah, so to start, in terms of looking at what's been positive, I feel like energy efficiencies had the opportunity to be mainstreamed as part of the clean energy transition. We have policies in place, we have political buy-in, and we're starting these discussions, as mentioned, at different stages. So it's a positive discussion to be had. We're putting a lot of emphasis on it here today, and it's exciting to keep this movement continuing. I think two areas I'd like to talk about in terms of challenge that I don't believe have been mentioned yet. One is domestic skills and technical ability to onboard new energy efficiency alternatives. We could have the finance lined up, we could have the political buy-in lined up, and we could have private sector on board. But without having local capacity to maintain and develop energy efficiency systems, there's going to be a limiting factor. In the Cambodian context, this is something we're starting the discussion on, but it's not something we've been able to prioritize yet, and it's a critical part of development towards energy transitions. We can't just fly in technical experts all the time. Eventually, we'll have to undertake this domestically. And the other side here that I think would be exciting to eventually maybe do a panel on at a future event would be the behavior change side of this. One, it's going to be really important to ensure at a consumer level and a household level that these energy efficiency changes are understood from a behavior change. It's asking people, in the Cambodian context, we have a march towards upper middle income. That often comes with 4 walls and an AC unit. There is a direct change to that, how you use that AC unit, how you use your energy, how you develop that, and how that impacts your day-to-day. The other side, which I think is a slightly broader developmental issue, we talk about our economic development potential as if it's inevitable. The amount of energy we'll be consuming has to be done as a result of this type of industrialization. We could have a wider discussion on the needs versus the wants in this economic development trajectory, and how energy efficiency could stimulate a larger discussion around economic development models related to aspects like the circular economy. Thank you.
Energy efficiency needs a strong champion, country level, regionally, and even globally. And the one mistake is that yes, there may be energy efficiency champions in many countries, but in some cases, the champion, the model the champion is flawed. Sometimes we expect government to lead the charge for a long period. Sometimes we expect private sector, let private sector be and let them lead the charge. But it's got to be multi-sectoral. We've got to get development players. We've got to get private sector. We've got to get government as equal partners transforming the market. And there has been very little attention to creating this champion, a multi-sectoral champion to transform the market. The second is to make it inclusive. I've been reviewing energy efficiency laws in the region, and the consumption thresholds for energy efficiency obligations are still very high in many countries. In Singapore, it's still like 54 terajoules annually. In Indonesia, they're trying to bring it down by a third, but it's still 6,000 tons of oil equivalent. And these are the large commercial or industrial end users, if not petrochemical mega refineries. So we've got to bring the consumption threshold down, to bring it down to the MSMEs, to bring it down to households. How do we flow down these obligations? How do they trickle down to the smaller energy users. So it's permanence, transform the markets with the durable, collaborative champions, and second, change the market, be more inclusive, go down to the small end user.
All right, well, my screen here is blowing up with questions from the audience. So I'm going to start to pivot to some of those questions, and a few of these questions are targeted to individual speakers. So I'll try to rotate you all through the hot seat, actually, as you answer these questions. I think this one's probably for you. Will the ASEAN harmonize standards as initiated during the first ASEAN summit incorporate or standardize regarding energy efficiency in the ASEAN region? And so I think there's a question about where we are with energy efficiency standards region-wide in the ASEAN.
Yeah, thank you. Just to highlight again the status of energy intensity achievements in ASEAN, as I presented previously, ASEAN now is achieving 24% energy intensity reduction in the 2021 base 2005 year level. And there is some main energy efficiency policy that we have implemented, including minimum energy performance standard. So in 2015, actually, ASEAN has set already regional policy roadmap for air conditioners. We are setting a maps of 2.9 watt per watt for AC. And now in 2020, ASEAN actually set a new regional policy roadmap for minimum energy performance standard for AC. We are now setting ISO GSPF 3.7 by 2023, and also we are setting a bit ambitious in 2025, referring to the ISO GSPF 6.03. So this is a new set regional policy roadmap of minimum energy performance standard for AC. Hopefully, we can achieve. I think we have seen some progress in 10 ASEAN member states. For example, Singapore actually exceeded the minimum energy performance standard for ISO GSPF, and also some ASEAN member states are moving to adopt the regional standard of ISO GSPF 3.7 by 2023 and ISO GSPF 6.03 by 2025.
Great, thanks. All right, moving on to another question. Thanks to Michael for highlighting civil society participation. Question for Wei Zhao. How do we get financial institutions like ADB to be responsive to the voices of civil society in the financing of governments? That's a good question. Tough question. It's a question for you, actually. I think you're being asked as the ADB consultant.
Well, I think I can't speak on behalf of ADB because I'm not ADB staff. I'm just a consultant. I can only speak on behalf of myself based on my own limited understanding of ADB operations. I think, as I said, in the existing and previous portfolio of ADB operations, hardly there were any building related projects. There were a couple of them, which honestly speaking did not reach expectation that it was supposed to reach at appraisal stage. I think part of the reason was that there was inadequate public consultation when designing that program. I remember that many years ago there was one project designed to support building energy efficiency in the PRC, and that one was designed to be a kind of a collaboration between ADB and one or two commercial banks in different cities. So the idea is that ADB would provide some concessional financing to kind of enhance the credit of the potential projects and project developers, so as to be able to incentivize the participation of commercial banks. But in this design, what is important is that how to select target buildings to be retrofitted for energy efficiency, and that require ownership of the building owners, residential buildings and also commercial buildings. I think the project could have made better progress, achieved better results if the building owners and broadly speaking, the civil society in that community can be better engaged, to support the project. I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I think we can have more discussion offline. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just follow up too to some of the other speakers. I think this gets to a question of who in the ecosystem of actors for energy efficiency is well represented and who is underrepresented in that ecosystem as we step back and we think about the voices we need to carry the day on energy efficiency and where we need to go. Does anyone have any thoughts on, whose voices are underrepresented, who are we hearing well, and who do we maybe need to listen to a little better?
Let me take a first crack at that. There are a lot of energy efficiency players. And, I was flashing logos earlier in my presentation, and you see the big names, the big multinational names there. And then because they have the resources for public affairs and government affairs and, to work with other sectors. But, once you go down market, the other energy efficiency players, the ESCOs and other players, we will not have the same resources and therefore tend to be underrepresented in several fora, in several initiatives and programs. So it's all about, and you can solve that by creating organizations that would embrace and capture the voices of the small players that are underrepresented.
So I think that it's the local and grassroots-based communities which are not represented in the policy making, which are not represented in energy efficiency debate. I mean, government makes the policy. We are here discussing at an international forum, and there are all the discussions that happen at the national and the state level forums, but it's the ground level grassroots community which are not represented, and they are often the users and the recipient of some of these policies. So those are the people. And in addition, there's consumer groups which are not represented enough, I believe, especially in the context, in the Asian context. There are groups, but they struggle to kind of, do some meaningful research, get some funds to work with the consumers to make consumers aware. So those are the two groups, I believe. It varies across countries, but I think like by far it's kind of common in the region.
The technical nature of the work we do sometimes excludes that consumer voice and that consumer participation, which is actually really critical. It's hard to participate as an individual, but even for the consumer groups in a place to know this space and the sort of, the technical nature of how an air conditioner operates and where the battle is to gain efficiency. So I have a few more questions here from the group. There's a question here on what is the impact on the private sector from enabling energy efficiency? What will this enable in their investment in energy development? And so a question to the group about talking a little bit more of, we really unlock energy efficiency. What's the impact on the private sector and how interested are they? So I'll throw this down to anyone who wants to. I'm not going in order anymore. You can just respond as you wish.
There was a report by the Philippine Department of Energy released just a few days ago saying that the end users, commercial and industrial, have invested 6.8 billion pesos in energy efficiency measures during the report years 2021 to 2022. That's a good thing. It's a good start. But where we have to get private capital is private capital invested in your own premises is already happening, but private capital or corporate equity being invested in someone else's premises as a business model, that's where it's lacking. So you see that model working a little bit for the ESCOs. You see that in rooftop solar, but you don't see much of that. One test here is the typical energy conglomerates in each of the countries, right? There's a lot of money pouring into solar and wind, onshore, floating, battery storage, but there's very little on energy efficiency as a distinct asset class. So it's still very early days. So I'd like to see more corporate capital flowing through energy efficiency assets for someone else's premises and not its own.
To add up the case of the Thailand, the status of the revolving fund, energy efficiency revolving fund of Thailand, is not operationalized currently because the lack of the capital. The government capital has a liquidity. So that's why Thailand is looking at more private capital in order to invest in energy efficiency. So from the case of the Thailand, I mean, it is ASEAN now is moving to promote greater involvement of the private. In order, if we see sometimes the public funding is very limited, and in the case of the Thailand, due to the COVID-19, there is an issue of repayment of the revolving fund. So there is a lack of public funding. That's why now so private is very much impactful in order to fill the gap of the public funding. Yeah.
So I have another question here that I think is probably going to be coming to you. This one's been submitted a couple different ways. Will there ever be an ASEAN-wide label for appliances and buildings? Will the ASEAN member states ever adopt a common energy efficiency label as we have in the EU? So some hypothesizing on the future of ASEAN policy.
Yeah, this is something actually ASEAN has been discussing in terms of the level, but now we are currently focusing on this establishment of the standard. As I mentioned, we are starting with the AC, minimum energy performance standard for AC, in order to really regulate and also to make sure the market transformation of the AC in the market and the ASEAN market. Now, also we are doing standard development for lighting, and in the future we are moving towards more appliances and equipment, such as we are targeting now in the near future to target common standard, harmonized standard for electrical motors and refrigerators, and also others main appliances in the market of the ASEAN member state. But in terms of the labeling, I think this is something that still under discussion, and how we actually going to move with a common label, because I think this is actually requires a lot of works and also coordination in order we can come up. But standard harmonious standard, this is something that we are more focusing, starting from AC and lighting. Now in the future we are looking at more coverage of appliances and equipment in order to really bring impact on energy consumption. And
starting with the test procedure.
Yeah.
Oh, right, correct. So one of the things, just as we're coming to the end of the session, one of the things that struck me, particularly from some of the early slides that were presented about the region and just from the conversation, is obviously the criticality of Asia to meeting our climate goals, to meeting our targets for energy efficiency. This region, the statistics you put forward on the buildings alone, and what will be built, and the lock-in, the percentage of lock-in of poor buildings that's potentially at play and at risk in this region is incredibly significant, and something that I think we need to be really refined and focused on, which strikes me that we have such great goals. I mean, it was really notable that the goals and the commitments are really there in the big picture, broad brush sense in most of the places in the world, and that it's really about not just those long-term goals, but what are we implementing now? Are our actions today aligned with where we need to go if we really want to get those goals tomorrow? And I'm just curious if any of you have reflections on places where you think we need better alignment between what we're doing now to get to where we want to be long-term. What are the places where, as you muse and you reflect back to enable energy efficiency, we need to prioritize a little more today to make sure we hit those 2030 targets, which are incredibly ambitious, 2050 targets, 2060 targets, they vary, but there's a lot of ambition and intention there. What about implementation and what we're doing now? Where's that gap?
If I may. I think this relates to DMC's NDCs, nationally determined contributions. We have come across so many NDCs in which the so-called identified or prioritized mitigation options look like a wish list, which are not underpinned by strong analysis, a strong sectoral diagnostic.
Yeah, our analysis of appliances, which Lauren can speak to in there, it has
Yeah.
similar
So-
conclusions.
Yeah. So, but on the other hand, as far as ADB is concerned, ADB has made the pledge of providing 100 billion US dollar climate finance by 2030 to support all the DMCs, not only not only energy efficient, but in a broader context, mitigation and adaptation. So the money is available on the table, but this money has to be spent in a sort of demand-driven basis. So we need to have the demand coming from the DMCs. So how can the DMCs come up with their demand? They need to firstly better understand what they need. How can they truly prioritize the interventions? So these require the interventions that ADB can provide and support. So this is what I said, the required enhanced upstream engagement between ADB and the DMC. I think this is also part of the ongoing reform within ADB, the new operating mode, whereby I think ADB will send more specialists on the field to resident mission to strengthen the dialogue, policy dialogue, country programming, identification of investment opportunities, design technical assistance together with government officials from different part of that DMC. So by doing so, I think the NDCs, the mitigation options, adaptation can be better refined.
Yep.
So more realistic, more to the point demand can come up, which for which ADB can provide more targeted finance.
And I would note that I think this challenge is not just for ADB. There's a lot of other sources of finance, sources of opportunity. And I do think this customization, right, really getting concrete and specific and tying specific projects to the finance that's available and tying specific projects to the implementation that needs to happen is a challenge that we all have before us as countries, as an NGO, like what CLASP is, who provides governance advice to governments, to those of us driving change at the country level, at the broad level with energy efficiency. And with that, I think that we'll have to summarize. That'll be our final word, a call for turning NDCs from wish lists into specific implementation plans and financing at play. I want to thank the ADB for inviting me to come and moderate this session. It's been thoroughly enjoyable spending this time with these esteemed speakers. Thank you all for your participation in a great dialogue. Thanks to the audience for a robust series of questions that came through the screen, and apologies that I didn't get to all of you. So with that, you can go to your coffee break. Thank you. Have a great day.